We're on, Katie.
We are.
Hello.
Good morning. Welcome to Be Informed. I'm Katie Aikens, Arizona Farm Bureau Ag in the Classroom.
Chelsea McGuire, Arizona Farm Bureau Government Relations, and we are here today to talk about agriculture's labor crisis.
Tough issue.
Yeah, really tough issue. Maybe something you guys don't deal with every day or think about every day, but it's definitely on the forefront of my department's mind all the time. So we're happy to talk a little bit about what the crisis is, why it exists, and what we're trying to do to fix it. So as always, if you do join us live, we're happy to take questions as we go. Just use the chat bubble. We'll answer them there. And then if you're joining us later on the recording, you know how to find both of us with additional questions. And we have a resources slide at the end of the presentation.
That's
so
right.
With all of that said, we'll start sharing the presentation. And here we go. All right. So, Katie. We currently do have a guest worker program. That's probably not news to anybody, right? We know that we bring in a lot of foreign labor here in the Arizona agriculture industry and across the agriculture industry in general. So the current program works through an application process. So you have a farmer that applies to receive the employees. They apply to multiple government agencies through the program. That's one of the problems we'll get to in a little bit. And then you have employees from other countries who apply to receive the visa to come over and actually do the work, all right? So they get matched, and that match isn't necessarily based on anything substantive. So it's just, hey, here's a time of need, here's an employee, they put them together.
So not necessarily, hey, I'm really good at harvesting lettuce, or I'm good at milking cows,
or I'm good experience here, I've done this or worked for this employer before. Not necessarily something that's going to be considered. All right, so then they get matched. The employee enters the United States at the time of need the farmer identified on his application. So, hey, I need a harvest crew from November to April. They enter for that time period, and then the farmer is the one who actually provides the housing, pays for transportation, which makes sense, right, because that employee is coming in from another country. Finding housing for up to 9 months is not exactly something that's easy to do regardless of your budget, but it's especially not something that's easy to do when you're on sort of what farm worker wages are going to look like, right? So they're matched, they come over, they do the work for however long that visa allows them to do, and then they return home. And the process starts all over, right?
Seems pretty simple and orderly.
Exactly. Seems super simple, right? Seems like it totally makes sense. However, we do not live in a perfect world. And so the reality of this program is actually very, very different. It's kind of a broken system, and that makes it ineffective, it makes it untimely, and it makes it cost prohibitive. So those are really our three big issues with the H-2A program. So why is it ineffective? Well, one of the reasons is that it's only seasonal visas. You can only come over for up to 9 months at a time. Okay. And Katie, do cows only need to be milked 9 months out of the year?
No.
No, right?
No.
So that really means that we've limited this program to be used only in very specific sectors of agriculture. Our animal ag friends can't really take advantage of it. Even our row crop guys, if you're talking cotton, alfalfa, although those are more seasonal, you're not going to retrain somebody every 9 months and every time they need to come in. So it just doesn't make sense for our guys who really aren't intensive harvesting periods to use this program. So it works pretty well for like our produce guys, fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, where you have those very intensive bits of harvest time or intensive labor needs. But if you've got a year-round thing, not really going to help you out.
Well, and do the produce folks, do they still experience issues with the seasonality of that? Like if there's a season, maybe it got extended because weather's good, but they've got people who've got to be going home. Does that affect them as well?
Yeah, something like that. Or even when you have the realities of staggered harvest, because you've got an intensive harvest season here, and then it might be another week or two before you have the next harvest. Those employees can't go work for somebody else during those 2 weeks who might need them. So they could be literally down the road, need an employee, but that employee can't go work for another employer. They can only work for the one that they've been licensed and visa to go
And
work
you have
for.
to really pay them while they're here, regardless if they're in the field harvesting.
Yeah, depending on what hours they're working.
Okay.
So that's, the seasonality makes it really difficult. It's also an administrative nightmare. We talked about what agencies they have to apply to. I don't know off the top of my head the number of agencies at the federal level who have their hands in this process, but it's at least 4.
Goodness.
And so when the Department of Labor and the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Agriculture are all involved in this one application process, it just means that you have more places for things to go wrong, more places for it to get bogged down, more ways for you to mess up the application, frankly, right? Maybe you didn't check the right box, or you spelled the name wrong, or you got a taxpayer identification number wrong by 1 digit, right? Gives you all of these places where the system can break down. And that really leads it to being untimely. So because of these administrative delays, on average, workers arrive about 22 days after the date of need that the farmer identified. And if you know anything about the produce industry, 22 days,
it's a big deal,
does not help you at all. You need those people there when you need them there. You have a very short, sometimes 24, 48-hour window that you can actually use that labor and need that labor.
And with that, so if they're arriving, if they can arrive up to 22 days late, how far in advance do the producers know that they're going to be arriving late?
Yeah, and that can vary too. So, you send in those applications and you get matched, and you may not know that they're going to arrive 22 days late, maybe until they don't show up, or maybe you just don't get that information. So you haven't gotten the approval yet, you haven't gotten the visas yet, but you know that your harvest is coming in 2 days and you're still just waiting for that in the mail.
Talk about stress.
Yeah.
Absolutely no control over.
For real. Stress and just losing tons of money, right? We're going to waste food. We're going to have to go hire other employees when we've already gone through the process to try to hire these employees, and then maybe they come while you've got your other employees. It's absolutely crazy. So about $320 million a year is what that untimeliness costs us, and the rest of the program is really cost prohibitive too. We talked about that housing and transportation, right, which makes perfect sense, but it also is very, very expensive, and so not all employers can afford to do it. It also doesn't make quite as much sense here in Arizona, because a lot of our employees are coming to Yuma from Mexico close enough that they can drive back home every day. And in fact, they do drive home every day. Many of them do. Nevertheless, our farmers have to provide housing for those people. So there's literally empty housing that our farmers are paying for because these employees don't need to use it. They want to go back home. They want to be with their families at night. So if you have ever tried to get a hotel in Yuma during produce harvest season and haven't been able to, that's why. The hotels are what they've looked out for that.
It's full, yet they could actually be empty.
That's right.
Oh, my God.
That's right. Very interesting. The other way that this is a really costly program, too, is something called the adverse effect wage rate. And that wage rate is set by the Department of Labor. That's the hourly wage that you have to pay your H-2A employees. And that wage rate is extremely problematic.
Okay.
So let's talk about that a little bit.
Adverse effect wage rate.
Yeah.
So basically like the minimum wage.
Yeah. That's right.
Okay.
It's minimum wage for these guest workers. And like I said before, it's set by the Department of Labor. And the idea is, and as its name kind of implies, that we're going to create a wage floor, a minimum wage, that makes up for the fact that we don't have domestic workers in these jobs. So the idea is, if you just basic supply and demand, basic economics, if you have to pay more for a foreign employee, that gives you an incentive to hire a domestic employee instead. So that's why this wage rate is created, is to try to make up for all those factors and try to encourage our employers to hire domestic employees instead of hiring a foreign worker, and therefore we have an American who doesn't have a job.
Does it work?
No. Domestic employees don't want the job. If they did, we wouldn't be relying on the foreign work in the first place.
And that's an interesting concept, that AEWR, because I think there's sort of this perception that our producers or producers in agriculture are going to different countries to get cheap labor.
Yeah.
Right? Well, if they knew this even one factoid.
Yeah, that might make up for it, right? The fact that not only is it not cheaper on the outset, but it doesn't matter what we pay, we still can't get a domestic worker to fill the job that our H-2A and foreign workers typically want to fill. So AEWR is kind of a difficult thing for us to navigate. And if you really want to look at the economics of it, we did a breakdown a few months ago that says, okay, what does AEWR look like as compared to Arizona's minimum wage? And so over the last 5 years, you'll see there's 1 year where it's actually been lower than Arizona's minimum wage by a whopping 4 cents. And that was right after a minimum wage increase. And so the timing of that may have had something to do with that it didn't quite catch up. But you look at it now, in 2019, it was a full $1 higher. 2020, it's almost a full $1 higher. And you also see how it increases year over year. So that increase is very sporadic. It's very unpredictable. One of the things that they kind of jokingly say about the AEWR is that it's created in a black box. And the Department of Labor has magical numbers that they throw into the black box, and then they pull it out, and here's their number. Because no one really knows exactly.
There's no, like, true formula.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so that's a source of pressure for our farmers as well, is not knowing, okay, what is that rate going to be and how do I budget for that?
What in the world? 2016, $8 minimum wage, and AEWR was $11.20.
Pretty crazy, huh? That very significant increase. And I'll also say this too, and a lot of our farmers back this up, even with the AEWR, like, they're going to be paying these employees a very livable wage because of how important it is for them to get those employees here.
Right.
So they're trying to maintain competitiveness as well. But the problem is AEWR isn't competitive either. And so, you know, there's just all of these factors. That's just one more thing that they can't control that makes the program cost prohibitive in a way that doesn't make market sense. So kind of leads us to one of our big questions. As you know, as we do these, we try to break down a couple of big questions that we think about you might wanting to do in your ag issues presentation, you know, as that yes or no, that both sides. And so this is probably a good one if you wanted to get really specific on the labor topic, which is one that's easy to get kind of bogged down in because there's so many aspects of it. So if you wanted to be very laser focused, this might be a good place to start. And it does the AEWR, the average effect wage rate, make sense? So there's one that says yes. You know, we shouldn't be able to undercut our American employees by allowing foreign labor to come in at cheaper rates. And this protects American jobs, and it protects the employees from the other countries as well to make sure they have a higher rate. And then there's a side that says no, because domestic workers don't apply for these jobs. Or if they do apply, they don't keep them because they realize how difficult they are. And then there's the argument that the market should drive the wages. That's how it happens in pretty much every other industry. And that this minimum wage that's not market-based doesn't make it easy to do what we need to do in agriculture. So if that's something you wanted to talk about, I would highly recommend that as one of your talking points if you really do want to go into a labor topic. But then the second question, I guess, probably is way bigger, right?
Yeah. I mean, if we're not using H2A, what other options are there?
That's right. What do we do if H2A is not working and there's nothing else available for us? Well, from the American Farm Bureau perspective, this is probably the biggest question. We're really thankful that there are some pretty big minds that are working on it, but this is what we need. Legislation that provides any grower of any crop or commodity in any part of the country at any time of year the legal labor that that grower needs in an affordable and efficient way.
Yeah, I mean, wow.
Simple, right?
Not simple.
No.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, wow.
It's
We're not asking a lot, are we?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I ask for so little.
Wow.
So this is a big question, and it's not going to be one that's answered in a yes or no way, right? Because look at all of these factors that are going to play into that. It's going to be politics. It's going to be economics. It's going to be where you are in the country. It's going to be what you grow, right? Different commodities and different growers are going to have different labor needs throughout the year. And so what we're happy about is that we do have some smart people that are working on this and have been for a really long time. But right now we have a current proposed solution that we've been working on it since early 2019, and it's called the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. And this is a piece of legislation that was developed in conjunction with a group called the Ag Workforce Coalition. And talk about really smart people. If you want to talk about the labor needs of American agriculture, these are the guys that you talk to. The coalition includes the American Farm Bureau, American Hort, the Western Growers Association, which represents a lot of our Yuma, California produce growers, the United Fresh Produce Association, our national milk producers, our Western dairymen, this is the creme de la creme of
all the voices in there.
Exactly. And so this group has been around for quite a while, and they've always tried to find opportunities to improve our farm labor needs. And so this is their latest sort of iteration of that. So what we're going to do is go through the bill. We're going to go through what we liked about it. We'll go through what we aren't a big fan about it, and then kind of talk about what the next steps are on the bill from there. So good things about the bill always start out with the good, right, Katie?
That's right.
Every time.
Reel them in. Slam them down.
So it deals with our current undocumented workforce. Probably hear that a lot in these conversations of, well, what do we do about the people who are already here? They don't have papers, but they're working for us and they're doing good work and they're contributing and doing really good things. There's, this spectrum that's like, all right, deport them and build the wall, and then there's the spectrum of give everybody amnesty and let them all in, and that's where you hear all of these really annoying political conversations that
heated. Emotional.
100% emotional, not always fact-driven, right? This bill actually has a plan to deal with that population of workers through an adjustment of status provisions, and we'll go through some of the details on that. It also recognizes the fact that 9 months is not long enough for agricultural employment. So it recognizes that we need a year-round not a temporary employee, and has a way to give us that. And then when we talked about that AEWR and how we saw those really unpredictable dips and peaks in the AEWR, gives us some guideposts on that. So it prevents some of that craziness that we talk about. So how does it deal with our employees that are currently in the country and they don't have documents? It would allow them to adjust their status by obtaining something that they call Certified Ag Worker or CAW status, CAW status. It sounds like a crow. I don't particularly love the acronym, right? But the way that an employee is eligible for that is depending on how long they've worked in agriculture before this bill hypothetically goes into play. So if you worked 180 days over the last 2 years in ag, so you have a history of working there, then you can adjust to H2A, so not quite the CAW status. And then if you've worked 100 days per year, if you worked 180 days over the last 2 years, then you can adjust to that. If you haven't gotten that far, you can adjust to an H2A, and then you kind of have to go through that whole process to adjust to the CAW. Right. So you've worked 180 days over the last 2 years in the agricultural industry. That's going to allow you to be able to adjust your status. Now, after you adjust to Certified Ag Worker status, you can also qualify for permanent residency, which kind of deals with that issue of, is my family going to be safe? I've built a life here. What do I do with that? Right. So it provides a legal way to do that. And again, that's based on how long you've worked in agriculture. So if you've worked in ag for 10 years or more, you can adjust to be a legal permanent resident after 4 more years of ag work.
So 14 total years of ag.
That's
this
right.
Isn't people coming and working a season and then they're in.
That's right.
It is still a long process.
Very long process. And then if you haven't worked in ag for 10 years, but less than that, and still enough to adjust to that CAW status, right, so at least 2 years, but less than 10, then after 8 years of continued ag work, you can adjust to legal permanent resident status. So the earliest you'd be able to get 10 years.
10 years.
Right.
Wow.
So between 10 and 14 years, essentially, is the timeline that we are looking at for this potential adjustment of status. And then once you have your legal permanent resident status, you don't have to work in agriculture anymore either. You can move around to a different industry. While you're working on that, you have to stay in the ag industry.
Okay.
So a lot of guide rails on this, and from the Farm Bureau perspective, makes a lot of sense to have this kind of adjustment of status provision, and so we're very encouraged to see that in the bill as it stands.
And hopefully, as they're working through this process, even once they are permanent residents, they continue to work in the industry because they build those relationships with our growers, and our growers and producers do treat these individuals very well.
Absolutely. Not only do they have that institutional knowledge now on just how to be really good at their jobs, like you said, they've created this a relationship with their employer, and you really want to keep that, and you want to keep those good workers and do everything that you can to do that. So. Other thing we liked about the bill was some of the reforms to the H-2A program. Mentioned the length of the visa, right? So now instead of just a 9-month visa, there are up to 36 months of visa, which is 3 years for ag employees. Makes a whole lot more sense, right?
Do you know how long they have to go back before they can reapply?
So for this particular one, I actually don't remember. We did talk about that for quite some time. But with the H2A, we should have.
My bad.
We'll go back.
Got a question.
With the current H2A, if you got the 9-month visa and you go back, I think it's just finishing out that calendar year.
And then you can
start every calendar year. Again, I'm not entirely sure on that. We can look for that.
We'll look it up. Yeah.
Right. We'll add it to the links.
We'll make a video.
That's right. So, up to 36 months, but there's a catch. There's a really, really big catch, actually, on this. And it's that we can only have 20,000 of these 36-month visas for ag. To give you a little bit of perspective, the United Farm Workers, it's a union association, anticipates that there are about 500,000 unfilled ag jobs across the nation. So, this isn't going to do a whole lot.
Yeah, it's kind of a drop in the bucket.
Exactly. And the other little caveat, so the catch to the catch, is that the first half of the visas are reserved for dairy, which means that there are 10,000 visas for dairy, and then there are 10,000 additional visas for dairy and the rest of agriculture. So already, and we love that with our dairy guys, right? Dairy is a very important industry here in Arizona, and we're
consistent.
Yeah, would definitely be happy with that. But again, we're a general ag organization, so we represent every commodity, and that means that we have to consider the impacts on every commodity across the state and ultimately across the nation. So, not super happy about that cap. There's a little bit of relief in years 4 through 10 because there's some discretion. The leaders of USDA and DOL, whoever those folks may be at the time, can say, all right, we can have 12.5% more than last year. So we can increase that number at a 12.5% rate. Again,
I like how you had in parentheses.
Yeah.
Or
may not. Because it is discretionary, and it's only 12.5% when we need, I don't even know what the percentage is from 20 to 500,000. Like,
yeah.
That's not going to give us a whole lot of relief in terms of actually solving our labor crisis for folks who are looking for legal, affordable labor. So that's one of the big issues we have with the H2A reform piece of it. And then the other is that the good thing is that the wage rate is smoothed out. So on that AEWR chart that we showed you a little bit more, and we had those percentages increases of like 14%, 7%. Those increases could never be more than 3.2% from the previous year. There are some caveats that it could be up to 4%, but that's a little bit beyond what this webinar needs to go into. And then the wages can't decrease more than 1.25%. So we did see some pretty significant decreases in the AEWR that were maybe a little higher than that. So there would be a guidepost there too, but they couldn't increase more than 3.2%.
But they're still not really telling us how they're coming to that wage.
That is correct.
Okay, but at least it's some guidelines.
Some guidelines.
I have an idea.
That's right. So it makes it a little bit easier to actually budget for that. So what are the pain points with the bill? We talked about we liked, and there was a lot there to like, but does the good outweigh the bad? Let's go through and find out. So first of all, that wage rate, right? It sets AEWR at the floor, and that's already the floor, right? It's already the minimum, but it sets the $12 AEWR as the floor. And it still doesn't let that rate increase or decrease or change with the market. It's still not a market rate. So yeah, it's really great that we're putting those guideposts on AEWR, but it still exists. AEWR is still the basis of what we are paying our employees, and that hasn't made sense since the H2A program started. And our farmers have been advocating for more significant reforms than this to the AEWR program since the program has started. And what we're basically doing is guaranteeing that it sticks around for at least 10 years and no guarantee of removal after that. So we really don't like that it recognizes AEWR as valid. We don't like that it continues the AEWR program. As much as we appreciate the guideposts, it still keeps the flawed system as the basis of the system. So we think if you're going to fix it, you should fix it right. Second, we talked about it already, that cap on those long-term visas, right? 20,000 visas for 500,000 open positions, that's not a solution. That's a Band-Aid covering the bullet hole. It's the finger in the jam. It's whatever metaphor you want to use, but it's just not there, right? It's not what we need. And that restricting the visas by sector, that's problematic for us as well. You know, we love our dairy guys, like I said, but we want to make sure everybody has access to that labor. And the other thing that makes this a big deal, Katie, is the politics of it.
Always.
Always the politics of it, right? Because let's think about this. We passed this bill, and we have 20,000 year-round visas, and in 5 years, when it's clear that we have even more than 500,000 open positions, and we can only increase this by 12.5%, we go to Congress again, and we say, hey, we actually need 100,000 year-round visas, or we need the 500,000 year-round visas. What happens is they look at the political realities, and they say, you were fine with 20,000 before. Why aren't you fine with that now? We gave you a fix already. Why are you coming back to us?
You seem like that person who just keeps back wanting more,
yeah,
more and more. And they see you coming and they kind of lock their door.
And it's really, really hard to get anything done, especially in this space. So when you get something that's successful, politicians want to wash their hands of it and not touch it again, because they already made the hard decisions. They already had an election cycle between then and now, so they don't have to run on that anymore or run against that anymore. You fix it, you're done, and that's kind of what you're stuck with. And we definitely saw that with H2A, right? We've had this program in place for a couple of decades now, and it's not working, but because it was a fix, we haven't been able to get it done. There's something out there. There is a solution. Take what you've been given and be glad for it.
So what's kind of the story around that 20,000 a year number that they came up with?
That's a great question, and that's actually another one of our issues with the bill, is that as far as we can tell, it's completely arbitrary. There is really no mathematical basis for it. It's basically sort of what we could work out between the labor unions and the politicians. And so we don't like arbitrary numbers either. We want those numbers to have a basis in something. And so that's another reason that this is difficult. You know, if you want to say, okay, we'll give you 50%, that makes sense, but that's not even what this is.
Right.
And so there's just a lot wrong with that cap on the visas that puts us at a significant political disadvantage later on, and then doesn't actually fix the problem now. So that was a major negative, or a major con in this column. Another big issue with this bill is a little bit in the weeds, but still really important to mention, and it's that this bill would create a whole new way for H2A employees to sue their employers. And one of the things we want to make sure that we're very clear about here is that we don't want to take away the ability for employees to enforce standards against their employers, right? When you have employers who are bad actors, those employees need to have protections, and they need to be able to go to the correct judicial or legal authorities and say, hey, this is happening and I need to be able to enforce what I deserve as a human being, right? But that already exists for our H2A employees. It exists under the Fair Labor Standards Act, and it exists under some other administrative procedures that H2A has in general. But what this bill would do is add a whole nother layer of protection under what's called the Migrant and Seasonal Ag Worker Protection Act. And the reason that's really problematic is not because we don't want our guys to, have to follow the rules. It's because this act goes straight to federal court because it's a federal statute. And so this is another sort of inside baseball thing when you're talking about litigation. But if you are the one being sued, federal court is not the place you want to be. You always want to be in state court, especially when you're small. State court's just easier. It's a little bit cheaper to litigate in state court. Federal court has timing issues. It's got all of this stuff. You always, always, always want to be in state court. And so to put our farmers at risk of going to federal court under something as simple as an employment claim is a huge, huge risk, and not something that we are willing to take, especially given some administrative reforms that were made to the H2A program, just in terms of how employees are paid and what those wage rates look like and how you track all of those things. What we're really afraid of is that those sort of administrative issues, when you're trying to figure out your payroll and maybe you make a simple mistake, suddenly you find yourself in federal court. We don't want that.
So this isn't necessarily giving employees more opportunities to go after employers, but when they do, it's much more severe.
Yeah.
And again, whether the employer was in the right or the wrong, they have to go through the entire process.
That's right.
Which is timely and costly, even if the employer is in the right.
That's absolutely
it's
right.
Just amplified.
And one of the ways that the bill tries to mitigate that is by making the cause of action go through mitigation first. Or so that's like a step down from court. Our stats show us it doesn't actually help that typically, even if you're going to go through that process, you're going to end up in court in one way or another. So very, very problematic, and again, sort of tipping the scales one way or another on this bill, right? And then finally, mandatory E-Verify.
And how do we feel about that?
Well, we don't love it. And again, it's not that we don't love it because we don't want our guys to hire legal employees. In fact, our guys really want to hire legal employees because they don't want to be in court. See, everything we talked about in the slide before. However, the problem is E-Verify, especially the way that it puts in this bill, puts us at a significant competitive disadvantage with all the other sectors out there who employ people because only agriculture would be mandated to implement it. So construction, hospitality, other industries don't have the same E-Verify program, and maybe there are, ways to, or efforts underway to make that happen, but at this point it would be a requirement for agricultural employers across the nation, but no other sector.
And is that simply because this current bill is specifically for agriculture, so you can't throw rules out there for everybody else, but it does single the industry out.
Singles the industry out kind of by default. And what American Farm Bureau has said, and Arizona Farm Bureau is in a slightly different position since we do, in fact, have a mandatory E-Verify program here in Arizona. But American Farm Bureau has said, look, we are fine with E-Verify as long as there's a meaningful guest worker program to make up for it. If we're going to have to go through these administrative steps to make sure that our people have the correct paperwork, which again, they're already doing, but if we're going to have that mandated, if we're going to have legal consequences if that doesn't happen, we have to know that the program we have to go through is going to get us the employment that we need when we need it. And so because this bill doesn't represent that program, E-Verify is not, in our opinion, an appropriate additive to this bill. If the bill represented that program and we liked the rest of it and felt like it was going to give us access to labor, then all right, we can handle E-Verify, we can deal with that. But at this point, it just puts us at a competitive disadvantage and doesn't actually fix the problem.
Is there a potential for all of this moving forward and some of these things getting removed?
There is, actually. Okay. And so that is a perfect segue to where we are with the bill. So it started out as a House bill sponsored by Representative Zoe Lofgren of California. In late December, it passed with some bipartisan support, not a ton of bipartisan support, but bipartisan nevertheless.
To get it through.
That's right. And then, Katie, it probably doesn't surprise you to hear that it's the House majority, so it is the Democratic Party right now who really got this bill out of the House. The conservative Republican wing is very concerned with the adjustment of status provisions, which gets us into the Senate version of the bill, which is very much in progress. So typically when you have a House bill and it comes to the Senate, you assume that they're just going to start with that House bill, right, and kind of go from there. What we've heard in our conversations with our delegation is that they're really sort of starting from scratch. They're using the bones of this, but not really taking the legislation as it was written and just modifying it. So we think that there will be a bill that looks very different from this act, and we think it will look very different in our favor. We're very encouraged by the conversations that we have had with our senators. We're very encouraged by the conversations that American Farm Bureau has been having. And the good thing about the Senate process as well is that it may have gotten the sort of feel that we weren't big fans of the bill in the House, right? And American Farm Bureau wasn't. In fact, the American Farm Bureau board did vote to recommend that the bill does not pass. So we did not support the bill in the House. And we were kind of the only ag organization that did that, which put us sort of on the outside of the rest of our friends, which is never, ever, ever a place we like to be. Because the negotiations have started over sort of anew in the Senate, we're all back on the same page. And that makes us really happy that we're here to be able to push. And we were all pushing in the same direction last time. We just had different opinions on the way that the bill was structured. And so now we're all back on the same page. We can be kind of one big happy family again and work with this group of senators that have pledged to take it up. Now,
so going back to last month, how a bill becomes law.
That's right.
I mean, I'm not going to sing the song again, even though I could. So if the Senate is sort of coming up with this similar yet totally different, right, and it passes through the Senate,
that's right.
It's got to go back to the House.
It will. And so what will happen is it'll go back to the House in the form of a conference committee, most likely. And so it'll be members of the Senate and the House that come together and say, here are our two very different but similarly structured bills.
Here's justifications, reasoning.
So how do we put that together?
Okay.
So That means, for many, many reasons, that this is a very fluid and probably very long timeline that we are looking at. We do have an election coming up this year, Katie, in case you hadn't noticed that.
I did.
Yeah, just in about 10 months. And so that's obviously going to play into any decision that is happening in Congress. The fact that we are going to have to conference these bills and reconcile them between the two chambers is going to play into it. So I don't know.
Do you think with the elections, personal opinion, and, knowing from what you do, with the election there, in any way could that help this process along?
Absolutely.
Slowing it?
Right?
Or?
When you've got people who want to be able to take something home to their constituents to say, hey, vote for me because look what I did, that's important. And I think whether it's a border state like ours, where we have this huge issue and this could really solve a lot of the costliness and timeliness issues that we have, or if it's in a state that's maybe not a border state, but it's just a huge ag state. If we're talking about Georgia, if we're talking even Florida, has a lot of issues with the seasonality of workers and that kind of thing too. That's always a good incentive. The flip side of that coin is that you're in a very conservative type of district. You're not going to want to go back home and campaign on the fact that you have this adjustment of status bill. And so it all
could be a
plays
wash.
both
Maybe
ways.
not good, not bad, but definitely brings some more drama.
And one of the things that we always say is that if everybody walks away from a bill mad, it's probably a pretty good bill. And that's about, I think, where we're going to end up with this one. But that doesn't mean that we can't make some really significant progress through the bill. So stay tuned, I guess.
Yeah.
Updates. We'll make sure that if anything significant happens, it's in while you were working. And just, stay tuned.
Awesome.
On the drama. So we didn't actually answer your big question number 2 for you, but, if you wanted to make it, how do you feel about the...
All questions don't have answers.
Well, that is true. As the mother of toddlers, we know that. So resources, so you guys can go do a little bit more research. Obviously, the American Farm Bureau is going to be a great place to go, especially their immigration and labor reform page. But then I also highly recommend the Ag Workforce Coalition's website, especially a whiteboard video that they've put together. It's pretty short, but it's really informative and helps you kind of figure out what we're doing. So if you wanted to have this distilled a little bit, the whiteboard video is the way to go.
I like those videos.
Me too.
They're kind of break it down.
Yeah.
Easy to understand. So, well, hey, Chelsea, thank you so much for breaking down labor a little bit for us. Looking forward to the things we're going to see in the future, and hopefully it comes out beneficial for everyone.
That's the hope, right? And so, if there's ever an opportunity for you guys to reach out to your congressman, you can do that through our website as well, and we'll make sure you know that. But this is a huge issue for our agricultural producers because you've got to have people who are there to harvest the food that we eat to get it to our tables safely and timely. And so we're always happy to work on this issue, even when the progress isn't exactly what we want it to be. But we're excited about the changes that are coming, we hope.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you. And we'll tune in next month to another exciting ag issue.
Yeah, in fact, it might be one based on a suggestion that one of you sent in. So stay tuned for that.
Dun, dun, dun.
That's right.
All right. We'll check you next month.
Thanks, guys.